when I pulled up to my vacant lot on Maple Street in Asheville, North Carolina that Tuesday morning in March. I found 47 cars parked on freshly poured asphalt where my grass used to be. My name is Logan Sanders, and I had owned this 3/4-acre piece of land for 8 years, planning to eventually build my dream workshop on it. But apparently, the Riverside Heights Homeowners Association had decided to use my property as their own personal parking lot without asking me first. I sat in my truck for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe I was confused about which lot was mine. I pulled out my phone and checked the property records I kept saved in my files. Nope, this was definitely my land. The coordinates matched exactly. The asphalt was so new I could still smell it. They had even painted crisp white lines dividing the spaces, numbered each spot, and installed a fancy wooden sign that read Riverside Heights Overflow Parking Residents Only. Solar-powered lights lined the perimeter. This wasn't some rushed job. This was planned, permitted, and executed with my property as if they owned it. I got out of my truck and walked across the lot, my boots clicking against the fresh pavement. Several people were walking away from their parked cars, chatting cheerfully as they headed toward the main neighborhood entrance about 200 yards away. One woman, probably in her 30s, smiled at me. "Nice that they finally added more parking, right?" she said. I was so tired of having to park 3 streets over when we had guests. I didn't respond. My mind was racing through the legal implications of what I was seeing. This wasn't just trespassing. This was construction on private property, permanent improvements made without owner consent, and now active use of my land by dozens of people who thought they had permission to be here. I walked the entire perimeter. The lot covered most of my land, leaving only a thin strip of grass along the edges. They had even installed a storm drain system. The level of investment here had to be in the tens of thousands of dollars. I pulled out my phone and called my attorney, Richard Morrison. He had handled the purchase of this property for me years ago and had helped me with various legal matters since. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Logan, what's up?" "Richard, I need you to tell me I'm not crazy. I'm standing on my vacant lot right now, except it's not vacant anymore. The HOA built an entire parking lot on it." There was a pause. "The Riverside Heights HOA, the one that's been sending you those letters, that's the one. For context, I wasn't actually part of Riverside Heights. My property sat adjacent to their development, purchased years before the neighborhood was even built. The HOA, led by their president Margaret Vance, had been sending me increasingly aggressive letters for the past 3 years, asking me to join their association voluntarily. I had politely declined every time. My land wasn't part of their development, and I had no interest in paying their fees or following their rules. The letters had gotten nastier over time. Margaret had accused me of being unneighborly and claimed my vacant lot was an eyesore that hurt their property values. I had kept the grass mowed and the area clean, so I ignored her complaints. But apparently, she had decided to escalate. "Don't touch anything," Richard said. "Take photos of everything. Every angle, every car, every sign. Document all of it. Then send me the photos. I'm going to make some calls." I spent the next 30 minutes photographing the entire lot. I took wide shots showing the scope of the project, close-ups of the pavement and line work, pictures of the sign, and photos of every single parked car including their license plates. I documented the storm drains, the solar lights, and the narrow strips of my property they had left untouched. As I was finishing up, a silver Lexus pulled into one of the empty spots. A middle-aged woman with blonde hair cut in a severe bob got out, carrying a designer handbag. She looked at me with narrowed eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting I was the one who didn't belong. "I'm Logan Sanders. I own this property." Her expression shifted to something between annoyance and disbelief. "This is HOA parking. If you're not a resident, you need to leave." "I am the property owner," I repeated slowly. "I own this land, all of it. And I definitely didn't give anyone permission to build a parking lot here." She crossed her arms. "The HOA purchased this land months ago for community use. If you're trespassing, I'll call the police." I pulled out my phone and showed her the property deed. "According to Buncombe County records, which were updated as of this morning, I am still the sole owner of this parcel. So either you're mistaken or someone at your HOA committed fraud." Her face reddened. "That's impossible. Margaret showed us all the paperwork. We had a vote and everything." "Then Margaret lied to you. I never sold this land. I've never even met with anyone about selling it." The woman grabbed her phone. "We'll see about that." She dialed and put it on speaker. After 2 rings, another woman answered. "Margaret, it's Susan. There's a man here claiming he owns the parking lot. He says his name is Logan Sanders." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "I'll be right there." While we waited, 3 more cars pulled into the lot. I took photos of each one. Susan stood 15 feet away from me, glaring as if I was the problem. The irony wasn't lost on me. 10 minutes later, a black Mercedes SUV came speeding down Maple Street and pulled directly up to where Susan and I were standing, not even bothering to use a parking space. Out stepped Margaret Vance. I recognized her from the signature on all those letters. She was probably in her mid-50s, wearing expensive athletic wear and oversized sunglasses. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from being used to getting her way. "Mr. Sanders," she said, not offering a handshake. "What seems to be the problem?" "The problem is that you built a parking lot on my property without my permission." Margaret smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I think you're confused. This land was sold to the Riverside Heights HOA 3 months ago. We have all the proper documentation." "Then you should have no problem showing me that documentation, because I never signed anything. The previous owner sold it to us. I am the previous, current, and only owner this property has had since 2017. You want to try again?" Margaret's smile faded. "The county records must not be updated yet." "They're updated as of this morning. I checked specifically after seeing this." I gestured at the parking lot. "So let me be very clear. You built a permanent structure on my private property without my knowledge or consent." "That's not a misunderstanding. That's trespassing and vandalism at best, fraud at worst." Susan stepped forward. "Margaret, what is he talking about? You said you bought this land." "It's being handled," Margaret snapped at her. She turned back to me. "Mr. Sanders, I'm sure we can work something out. The HOA has invested significant resources into this project. We acted in good faith, believing we had proper ownership. Perhaps we can negotiate a fair price for the land." "You didn't act in good faith. You never contacted me about purchasing this property. Not once. You sent me letters demanding I join your HOA, and when I refused, you decided to just take my land anyway." "That's not what happened." "Then explain to me exactly what did happen, Margaret." "Because from where I'm standing, you committed fraud. You told your HOA members you owned this land. You got permits from the county using false ownership claims. You hired contractors and had them build on property you knew you didn't own. That's multiple crimes." More people had gathered now, residents who had parked earlier coming back to see what the commotion was about. I could hear them murmuring to each other. Margaret's face was tight. "I'm going to give you one chance to be reasonable. The HOA needs this parking." Our development doesn't have enough spaces and your vacant lot was just sitting here unused. We've improved it, added value to it. You should be thanking us." I actually laughed at that. "Thanking you? You paved over my land without permission and think I should be grateful. We're prepared to offer you $15,000 for it. It's worth at least $80,000 as vacant land, more now that you've made improvements to it. But I'm not selling. Not to you, not to anyone." Margaret stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Don't be stupid. You can't win this fight. The HOA has lawyers on retainer. We have resources. You're one person. And I have property rights, which, in case you forgot, are pretty strongly protected in this country. I also have documentation proving ownership, photos of your HOA members trespassing, and evidence of your fraud. So here's what's going to happen. You have 24 hours to remove every trace of this parking lot from my property. That means the asphalt, the signs, the lights, all of it. Return my land to its original condition. If you don't, I'll take legal action." Margaret's jaw clenched. "That's insane. Do you have any idea how much that would cost? About as much as it costs to build it, I'd imagine. That's your problem. We're not doing that. Then I'll see you in court. Oh, and one more thing. All these cars currently parked here. They're trespassing on private property. I want them gone by 5 p.m. today." Susan grabbed Margaret's arm. "Wait, our cars are illegal." "No," Margaret said firmly. "He's bluffing. This is HOA parking. You all have permission to park here." "Permission from someone who doesn't own the property is meaningless," I said. "You're all trespassing, and if these cars aren't moved by 5 p.m., I'll have every single one towed." The crowd erupted in protests. Margaret held up her hand for silence. "Don't listen to him. He can't do anything. This is just intimidation. Everyone go about your business." I pulled out my phone and called Richard back. "I need a towing company recommendation. Multiple trucks available this evening." "Hold on," Richard said. I could hear him typing. "Blake's Towing has a contract with the county. They can handle bulk tows. But Logan, are you sure you want to do this? It's going to make you extremely unpopular." "They built a parking lot on my land, Richard. I think that ship has sailed." He gave me the number for Blake's Towing. I called them right there, standing in the middle of the crowd. A gruff voice answered. "Blake's Towing. Hi, my name is Logan Sanders. I own a piece of private property at 847 Maple Street in Asheville, and there are currently 47 cars trespassing on it. I need them towed starting at 5 p.m. today if they haven't been moved voluntarily. How many trucks can you have available?" 47 cars. "We can get 5 trucks there. That'll take a few hours to clear them all. You sure you own this property? I don't want any legal trouble." "I'm absolutely certain. I can email you the deed and property records right now." "Do that. If everything checks out, we'll be there at 5 sharp. Our impound lot is on Industrial Drive. The owners can pick up their vehicles after paying the towing fee and daily storage charges." "What are the fees?" $250 for the tow, 40 per day for storage." "Perfect. I'll send those documents right now." I hung up and looked at the crowd. Margaret was bright red, her hands balled into fists. "You can't do this." "I absolutely can. Those cars are on my private property without permission. That's textbook trespassing. Now all of you have until 5 p.m. to move them. I suggest you start making calls." I walked back to my truck, feeling dozens of angry eyes on my back. Let them be mad. They'd parked on my land, believed their HOA's lies, and were now facing the consequences. I had no sympathy. As I drove away, my phone started ringing. "Richard." "Logan, I just got off the phone with the county. There's no record of any sale or transfer of your property. The permits for that parking lot were filed showing the HOA as the owner, but they never provided proof of ownership change. The county assumed everything was legitimate and approved it. So the county screwed up too. They did, but the bigger issue is the HOA committed fraud on those permit applications. That's a serious crime. I'm drafting a cease and desist letter right now, and I think we should also file a police report for the fraud. Do it. All of it. This is going to get ugly, Logan. It already is ugly. They paved my land. I'm just responding appropriately. I spent the rest of the day at my actual home in North Asheville, preparing for what was coming. I organized all my property documents, printed extra copies, and reviewed my homeowner's insurance policy to see if it covered legal fees for property disputes. It did, up to $50,000. That was something, at least. At 4:30 p.m., I headed back to Maple Street. When I arrived, the parking lot was in chaos. People were frantically trying to move cars, shouting at each other, talking on phones. Margaret was there with a man in an expensive suit who I assumed was the HOA's attorney. When she saw me, she marched over. "This is David Pritchard, our lawyer. He's advising me that you can't tow these vehicles without proper signage indicating it's private property, and no parking is allowed." David nodded. "She's correct. North Carolina law requires clear signage before you can tow vehicles from private property." I pulled out a folder from my truck. Actually, I looked that up. The law requires signage for private lots that are generally open to the public, like parking lots for businesses. This isn't a public accommodation. This is my private land, which I've never opened to public use. Your clients created signage indicating this was HOA parking, which explicitly means it's restricted access, not public. Everyone parking here believed they had special permission, which means they knew it wasn't open parking. That actually works in my favor. David frowned. That's a creative interpretation. It's the correct interpretation, but if you want to test it, we can. The tow trucks arrive in 20 minutes. Any car still here gets towed. The owners can argue with the towing company and eventually file in small claims court to try to get their money back. But that's a hassle nobody wants. Or everyone can just move their cars. Margaret's face was purple now. "You are making an enemy of this entire neighborhood. You made me an enemy when you paved my land. I didn't start this, Margaret. You did." More cars were leaving now. Owners had rushed from their homes, some still in house slippers, to move their vehicles. But plenty of cars remained, either because their owners couldn't be reached or because they were calling Margaret's bluff. At 5 p.m. exactly, 5 tow trucks from Blake's Towing pulled up. A massive man in a Blake's Towing uniform got out of the first truck and walked over to me. "Logan Sanders." "That's me. I'm Blake Harrison, owner of Blake's Towing. I reviewed your documents. Everything looks good. These the vehicles." He gestured at the 28 cars still parked on the lot. "Every one of them. You got it." What followed was beautiful chaos. The tow truck operators worked with efficient precision, hooking up cars and loading them onto flatbeds. Each car that was towed produced a fresh wave of outrage from the gathering crowd. People were screaming, crying, threatening to call the police. Several people did call the police. 2 Asheville Police Department officers arrived about 30 minutes into the towing operation. They talked to Margaret first, then came over to me. "Sir, are you Logan Sanders?" the older officer asked. His name tag read Officer Patterson. "I am. Can you explain what's happening here?" I handed him copies of my property deed and the county records. "This is my land. The HOA built a parking lot on it without my permission or knowledge. These vehicles are trespassing, so I'm having them towed." Officer Patterson reviewed the documents carefully. His partner, Officer Kim, walked around the lot taking notes. "And you never gave the HOA permission to build this?" "Never. I didn't even know about it until this morning." Margaret rushed over. "Officers, this man is harassing our residents. We own this land. The purchase just hasn't been recorded yet. Do you have documentation showing you own this property?" Officer Kim asked. "It's in process." "That's not what I asked. Do you have a deed or transfer documents?" Margaret hesitated. "Our attorney is handling it." David stepped forward. "Officers, this is a civil property dispute. It's not a criminal matter." "Actually," Officer Patterson said slowly, "if Mr. Sanders owns this property and never gave permission for construction, and if someone filed permits claiming ownership they didn't have, that might be fraud. That would be criminal." I pulled out another folder. "I have copies of the permit applications the HOA filed with Buncombe County. They listed themselves as the property owners. But as you can see from the county records, I'm the owner and have been since 2017. I never signed any transfer documents." Officer Patterson looked at Margaret. "Madam, did you file permit applications claiming to own property you didn't actually own?" "We acted in good faith, believing we were purchasing the property." "That's not what I asked." Margaret's attorney put a hand on her arm. "My client isn't answering any more questions without proper legal counsel present." "That's her right," Officer Kim said. "But Mr. Sanders, your documentation looks legitimate. You have the right to remove trespassing vehicles from your property. The towing appears legal." "Thank you, officer." The police left and the towing continued. By 7 p.m., all 28 cars had been removed. The parking lot stood empty except for Margaret, David, a handful of angry residents, and me. "This isn't over," Margaret said. "Not even close." "You're right about that. I want this entire parking lot removed from my property. You have 2 weeks. After that, I'm billing you for restoration costs and filing a lawsuit for damages. You can't afford to fight the HOA. Try me." I left them standing there and drove home, exhausted but satisfied. They had violated my property rights in the most blatant way possible, and I wasn't going to let it stand. The next morning, I woke up to 17 voicemails and 43 text messages. Most were from phone numbers I didn't recognize, residents of Riverside Heights who had found my contact information somehow. The messages ranged from angry to threatening to pleading. Several people offered to pay me to let them park on my land. Many more just cursed me out. I ignored all of them and focused on the message from Richard. He wanted to meet at his office at 10 a.m. I grabbed coffee and headed downtown. Richard's office was in a converted historic building near Pack Square. His secretary showed me straight in. Richard sat behind his desk with a stack of papers in front of him. "This is bigger than we thought," he said without preamble. "I've been digging into the HOA's permits and finances. Margaret Vance filed all the permit applications herself, claiming ownership of your property. She also withdrew $47,000 from the HOA's reserve fund to pay for the parking lot construction. Did the HOA board approve that? That's the interesting part. There are meeting minutes showing a vote to approve the parking lot project, but the minutes say the lot would be built on HOA-owned land adjacent to the development. Your property is never specifically mentioned by address. I think Margaret lied to her own board. Why would she do that? Control, ego, who knows? But she's exposed now. I filed the police report like we discussed. The DA's office will investigate. I'm also filing a civil lawsuit against Margaret personally and the HOA as an organization. We're seeking removal of the parking lot at their expense, damages for the violation of your property rights, and attorney's fees. How long will this take? Civil suits can take a year or more. The criminal investigation might be faster. But here's something interesting. I got a call this morning from David Pritchard, the HOA's attorney. He wants to negotiate. What's he offering? He didn't say specifics. He wants a meeting with you, me, him, and Margaret. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. here in my office. I thought about it. Fine. I'll hear what they have to say. But I'm not backing down. That parking lot comes out. The next day, I showed up to Richard's office 15 minutes early. Richard briefed me on negotiation strategy. His advice was simple. Listen, don't commit to anything, and remember I held all the cards. At exactly 2 p.m., David Pritchard arrived with Margaret. She looked like she hadn't slept well, her makeup not quite hiding the dark circles under her eyes. They sat across from Richard and me at his conference table. David cleared his throat. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I think we can resolve this situation amicably, without litigation. I'm listening, I said. The HOA acknowledges there was a misunderstanding about the property ownership. We're prepared to offer you $60,000 for the land, which is above market value for a vacant lot. In exchange, you drop any legal claims and everyone moves forward. No, I said immediately. Margaret leaned forward. You haven't even considered it. There's nothing to consider. You don't get to steal someone's property, build on it, and then force them to sell after the fact. That's not how property rights work. We made a mistake, David said. An honest mistake. Margaret believed she was negotiating with the correct property owner. Who did she think she was negotiating with? I asked. Silence. Exactly. There was no negotiation because she never contacted me. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. Margaret wanted that parking lot, knew I wouldn't agree to it, and decided to build it anyway, hoping I wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back. That's not true, Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. Then explain to me exactly how this honest mistake happened. Walk me through it. More silence. Richard spoke up. We're filing a lawsuit seeking $200,000 in damages plus attorney's fees and costs. The parking lot removal alone will cost at least $50,000. The property value damage, the trespass, the fraud on the permit applications, it all adds up. Your best-case scenario is that you end up spending a fortune on legal fees and still have to remove the parking lot. Worst case, Margaret faces criminal charges, and the HOA is liable for massive damages. You're bluffing, Margaret said. You want money. Everyone wants money. Name your real price. I stood up. I don't have a price. I want my land restored to its original condition. That's it. You have 12 days left before I start billing you for restoration costs. Wait, David said. Please sit. Let's discuss this rationally. There's nothing to discuss. You made an offer. I rejected it. The land isn't for sale. Remove the parking lot or I'll do it myself and send you the bill. Margaret stood too. You smug son of a... Margaret, David grabbed her arm. That's enough. No, he needs to understand the position he's in. We have lawyers. We have money. We have 300 families in Riverside Heights who are furious with him. His life is going to become very difficult. Are you threatening me? I asked calmly. I'm explaining reality. Officer Patterson's words from the night before came back to me. This was criminal, not just civil. And now Margaret was making threats. Richard, please note that Mrs. Vance just threatened me in front of witnesses. I'd like that included in our filings. Margaret went pale. David looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. We're done here, I said. Remove the parking lot or face the consequences. I left the conference room, Richard following behind me. Once we were alone in the hallway, he let out a low whistle. She's making this easy for us. Threatening you on the record was idiotic. She's desperate. People make mistakes when they're desperate. The criminal investigation is moving forward. I heard from a contact at the DA's office. They're taking the fraud allegations seriously. Building permit fraud is a felony in North Carolina. If they can prove Margaret knowingly filed false documents, she could face jail time. That gave me pause. I wanted justice, wanted my property restored, but I hadn't really considered that Margaret might actually go to jail. Then I thought about what she'd done. She'd committed fraud, violated my property rights, lied to her own HOA members, spent their money on an illegal project, and then threatened me when I wouldn't just roll over. Whatever consequences came her way, she'd earned them. The next week was intense. The story had spread through Asheville's local news. A reporter from the Asheville Citizen-Times called me for a comment. I declined, referring her to Richard. The story ran anyway, titled "Property Dispute Erupts Over Unauthorized Parking Lot." It was mostly factual, though it painted me as somewhat unreasonable for not accepting the HOA's purchase offer. The comments section on the online article was brutal. People who didn't know the full story called me greedy, vindictive, and worse. But some commenters understood the principle at stake. One person wrote, "If this guy backs down, it sets a precedent that HOAs can just take whatever land they want and force the owner to sell afterward. That's insane." That commenter got it exactly right. On day 13, with 1 day left before my deadline, a different attorney called Richard. Her name was Patricia Hendricks, and she represented the Riverside Heights HOA Board of Directors, not Margaret personally. The board has voted to remove Margaret Vance as president, effective immediately, Patricia told Richard on speakerphone. I was in his office for the call. They've also voted to accept responsibility for restoring Mr. Sanders's property to its original condition. They want to resolve this without litigation. What about Margaret? Richard asked. She's facing potential criminal charges. The board is cooperating with investigators. They want to make clear that Margaret acted without proper authorization. The board believed they owned the land because that's what Margaret told them. We'll need that in writing, Richard said. A formal agreement that the HOA will restore the property at their expense, plus compensation for Mr. Sanders's time, stress, and legal fees incurred to date. What dollar amount are we discussing for compensation? Richard looked at me. I'd thought about this. $25,000 plus all legal fees. I'll present that to the board. Can you give me 24 hours? Yes. The call ended. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Do you think they'll accept? I think they don't have a choice. The alternative is a lawsuit they'll lose and much higher costs. $25,000 plus legal fees is a bargain compared to what a judgment might be. He was right. The next afternoon, Patricia called back. The board had accepted the terms. Richard drafted a settlement agreement, both sides signed it, and just like that, the legal fight was over. The parking lot removal took 3 days. A crew came in with jackhammers and excavators, tearing up all the asphalt. They removed the signs, the lights, the storm drains. They brought in topsoil and reseeded the grass. When they were finished, my lot looked almost like it had before, just with fresher grass. I stood on my land that Friday afternoon, watching the last of the crew load their equipment. It felt like a victory, but a hollow one. I'd won, but I'd also made enemies of an entire neighborhood. My name was mud in Riverside Heights. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Mr. Sanders, this is Detective Ramirez with the Asheville Police Department. I'm investigating the permit fraud case involving Margaret Vance and your property. Do you have time to answer some questions?" "Sure." The detective asked me to walk through the timeline of events, which I did. She asked about my interactions with Margaret, the threatening statements, everything. I answered honestly. "One more question," Detective Ramirez said. "Did Margaret or anyone from the HOA ever contact you about purchasing your property before the parking lot was built?" "Never, not once." "Thank you, that's helpful. I'll be in touch if we need anything else." 2 weeks later, Richard called with news. Margaret Vance has been charged with 3 counts of filing a false document, 1 count of theft by deception, and 1 count of criminal trespass. The DA is offering a plea deal, restitution to the HOA for the money she spent on the illegal project, 2 years probation and community service. If she doesn't take it, they'll go to trial. What do you think she'll do? Take the deal. She doesn't want a felony conviction that could mean jail time. He was right again. Margaret took the plea deal a week later. The local news covered it. I didn't feel triumphant, just tired. The whole situation had been exhausting, but there was one more surprise coming. A month after the settlement, I got a letter from the Riverside Heights HOA board. Not a legal threat this time, just a letter signed by the new president, a man named Thomas Chen. The letter apologized for what had happened. It acknowledged that Margaret had acted improperly and thanked me for working with them to resolve the situation. Then, surprisingly, it asked if I would be willing to meet with the board to discuss a legitimate purchase offer for my land. I almost threw the letter away, but something made me pause. These weren't the same people who'd violated my property rights. This was a new board trying to clean up someone else's mess. I decided to at least hear them out. The meeting was at the Riverside Heights clubhouse on a Tuesday evening. 8 board members were there, including Thomas Chen. The atmosphere was completely different from my confrontation with Margaret. These people were respectful, apologetic, and professional. "We understand you have no reason to trust us," Thomas began. "What Margaret did was wrong, and we're still dealing with the fallout." Several board members resigned over this. "We've had to do special assessments to cover the costs. It's been a nightmare. I can imagine. But we still have a parking problem. Our development was built with minimal parking, and it's causing real issues for residents. Your land would solve that problem. We'd like to make a legitimate offer to purchase it if you're willing to sell." "What are you offering?" I asked, curious. $95,000. That's based on an independent appraisal we had done. We'd also be willing to negotiate up slightly if needed. It was a fair offer, actually more than fair. The appraised value before all this drama had been around $80,000. But did I want to sell to them after everything that had happened? "Can I ask you something honestly?" I said. "Why should I sell to you? After what Margaret did, why would I want to help this HOA at all?" Thomas nodded like he'd expected the question. "Because we're not Margaret. We're 300 families who bought homes here and are trying to make our neighborhood work. Most of us had no idea what Margaret was doing. We trusted her, and she betrayed that trust. We're trying to fix things the right way now." I looked around at the board members. They seemed genuine. These weren't entitled jerks trying to steamroll me. They were ordinary people stuck with a problem. "I need to think about it," I said. "Take all the time you need," Thomas said. "The offer stands. Thank you for even considering it." I went home and spent the evening thinking. Part of me wanted to say no out of pure spite. Margaret had stolen from me, lied about me, threatened me. The Riverside Heights HOA had become synonymous with that violation in my mind. But Thomas was right. The current board wasn't Margaret. The residents weren't Margaret. They were people who'd been lied to and manipulated, just like me in a way. I also thought about my original plan for the land. A workshop for my woodworking hobby. Did I really need 3/4 of an acre for that? I'd been holding on to the land more out of principle than actual need. Building the workshop would require significant investment, and honestly, my interest in woodworking had waned over the years. A week later, I called Thomas. "I'll accept your offer, $95,000, but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, I want a public apology from the board posted in your neighborhood newsletter and on your website, acknowledging what Margaret did and stating clearly that I was the victim, not the villain. Some of your residents have been sending me nasty messages, and I want that stopped. Done. What else? Second, I want a memorial plaque or marker somewhere on that parking lot once it's rebuilt. Nothing fancy, just something that says this land was donated in 2025 by Logan Sanders. I want there to be a record that I chose to help, that this wasn't stolen from me. We can do that. I think that's actually a great idea. Third, 15% of the parking spaces are reserved for public use, not just HOA residents. I don't want this to be some exclusive thing. Open it up to the broader community. Thomas paused. That one might be harder to sell to the board. Then we don't have a deal. Let me talk to them. Give me a few days. 3 days later, Thomas called back. The board had agreed to all 3 conditions. Richard drew up the purchase agreement and we closed a month later. $95,000 was deposited into my account. The land officially belonged to the Riverside Heights HOA. The public apology was posted the same day the sale closed. It was thorough and unambiguous, stating that Margaret Vance had acted illegally, that I had been wronged, and that I was now voluntarily selling the land to help the community, despite having every reason not to. The nasty messages stopped. 6 months later, I drove by Maple Street to see the finished parking lot. It looked almost identical to the one Margaret had built, except better planned and more attractive. Solar lights lined the edges. Clear signage indicated which spaces were public and which were for HOA residents. And near the entrance, there was a bronze plaque mounted on a stone marker. It read, "This land was generously donated for community use by Logan Sanders in 2025. We are grateful for his willingness to help our neighborhood despite past wrongs. May this space serve as a reminder to always act with integrity, respect property rights, and treat our neighbors with kindness." I sat in my truck reading that plaque 3 times. It felt like closure. The violation of my property rights had been real and serious. Margaret had faced consequences. But in the end, something good had come from it. The neighborhood had parking they desperately needed. I had fair compensation. And hopefully, everyone learned something about doing things the right way. As I was about to drive off, Thomas Chen pulled up next to me. He rolled down his window. "Logan, hey, I thought that was your truck. What do you think? It looks good, really good. We've been using the lot for 2 months now. It's made a huge difference. No more fights about parking, no more cars crowding the streets. We really can't thank you enough. You paid a fair price. Thanks aren't necessary. Still, what you did, selling to us after everything that happened, it meant a lot. Some of the board members wanted me to tell you that if you ever need anything, you've got friends in Riverside Heights now. That was unexpected. I appreciate that. There's actually something else. We fired our previous HOA management company. They clearly weren't doing proper oversight of Margaret. We hired a new company, and they're implementing new policies to prevent this kind of thing from ever happening again. Everything has to be transparent now. All board decisions, all financial transactions, everything gets documented and shared with residents. Margaret was able to do what she did because she had too much unchecked power. That's good. That's how it should be. Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to say thanks again. And I'm sorry for what you went through." We shook hands through the truck windows and then he drove off. I sat there for another minute, looking at that plaque before finally heading home. The story could have ended there, but there was one more piece. A year after everything started, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Margaret Vance. The letter was handwritten, several pages long. In it, Margaret apologized. Really apologized, not the non-apology kind of sorry that deflects blame. She took full responsibility for what she'd done. She explained that she'd been under enormous pressure from residents complaining about parking, that she'd let her ego and her desire to solve the problem override her judgment, and that she'd made terrible decisions she deeply regretted. She wrote about how the legal consequences had humbled her, how she'd lost friendships and her standing in the community. She'd had to do 100 hours of community service picking up trash along highways. She'd paid back the HOA the money she'd misappropriated. Her marriage had almost ended over the stress. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me if I were you. But I wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong. I violated your rights because I thought my community's needs were more important than your property. I was wrong. I'm sorry." I read that letter 3 times, just like I'd read the plaque. Then I did something I didn't expect to do. I wrote back. My letter was shorter. I thanked her for the apology and told her I accepted it. I didn't excuse what she'd done, but I acknowledged that people make mistakes, even serious ones, and that owning those mistakes is how we grow. I told her I hoped she'd learned from this and that I wished her well moving forward. I never heard back from Margaret, and I didn't expect to, but sending that letter felt right. Holding on to anger forever helps no one. The Riverside Heights parking lot is still there, still being used every day. Whenever I drive past Maple Street, I think about the whole saga. It taught me things about property rights, about standing up for yourself, about the importance of doing things the legal and proper way. It also taught me about forgiveness and moving forward. People sometimes ask me if I regret selling the land in the end, after I'd fought so hard to keep it. I don't. Fighting for my rights when they were violated was the right thing to do. But once those rights were respected, once I was approached properly and offered fair compensation, selling made sense. I didn't need that land. The community did. The workshop I'd planned to build never happened anyway. My interests changed, my priorities shifted. That land sitting vacant wasn't helping anyone. Now it's serving a purpose, and I got paid fairly for it. That's a good outcome. The whole experience also changed how I think about HOAs. Before this, I'd been pretty neutral on them. I understood some people liked having community standards and shared amenities. After dealing with Margaret, I became more wary. HOAs can be useful, but they're also organizations with significant power and minimal oversight. When that power is abused, the consequences can be severe. But meeting Thomas and the new board reminded me that HOAs are ultimately just groups of people. They're only as good or bad as the people running them. Margaret was bad. Thomas and his board were good. Organizations aren't inherently evil, but they need checks and balances, transparency and accountability. These days, I live my quiet life in North Asheville, away from HOAs and neighborhood politics. I've got my house on 2 acres with no one telling me what color I can paint my shutters or how tall my grass can be. It's peaceful, but I also stay informed about local HOA issues. I've even spoken at a few community meetings when HOA reform proposals come up. My story became somewhat well known in Asheville real estate circles as a cautionary tale. Realtors use it as an example when training new HOA boards about proper procedures. A local law professor even contacted me to ask if she could use my case in her property law class. I said yes. If my experience helps future lawyers understand the importance of property rights, that's worth something. The towing company, Blake's Towing, got a lot of business out of the whole thing too. Blake himself called me a few months after everything settled to thank me for the biggest single-day towing job his company had ever done. 28 cars in one evening had been a logistical challenge, but also extremely profitable. He laughed about it, said his crews still talked about that night. The people whose cars were towed were less amused, of course. Several of them had tried to sue me in small claims court to recover their towing and storage fees. Every single case was dismissed because they'd been parked on my private property without permission. One guy tried to argue that he thought it was legal parking because of the HOA signs, but the judge shut that down quickly. Ignorance of property ownership isn't a defense to trespassing, the judge had said. The HOA's signs don't override the actual owner's rights. Those small claims cases added up to about a dozen separate court appearances for me over several months. It was annoying, but also satisfying in a way. Each time the principle was upheld. Property rights matter, and you can't just take someone's land. I never collected the storage fees from the car owners. Blake's Towing handled all of that directly. They made several $1,000s off the storage fees alone, since some people couldn't afford to pick up their cars right away. I felt a little bad about that, but not too bad. Those people had parked on my land without permission, trusting an HOA that lied to them. They were victims of Margaret too, in a sense, but they still bore some responsibility for not verifying they were parking legally. The whole situation sparked a broader conversation in Asheville about HOA oversight and regulation. The city council held hearings about requiring more stringent checks before approving HOA permits. They implemented new rules requiring multiple forms of ownership verification before any construction permits could be issued for HOA projects. I testified at one of those hearings. It was intimidating, speaking in front of the city council, but important. I told them my story, explained how the existing system had failed, and urged them to close the loopholes Margaret had exploited. The new regulations passed unanimously. They're now called the Property Rights Protection Ordinance, though some people jokingly call them the Sanders Rules. I don't love having my name attached to it, but I'm glad the reforms happened. Looking back on everything now, nearly 18 months since I first discovered that parking lot on my land, I'm mostly just relieved it's over. The fight was exhausting. The conflict was stressful. But the outcome was just, Margaret faced consequences for her crimes. The HOA learned important lessons about governance and accountability. The community got the parking they needed. I got fair compensation. And Asheville got better regulations to prevent this from happening to someone else. It's not a perfect ending. Some people in Riverside Heights probably still think I'm a jerk. My name is still associated with conflict rather than the quiet, peaceful life I prefer. But I can live with that. I did the right thing, stood up for my rights, and ultimately contributed to positive change. The bronze plaque on that parking lot will be there for years, maybe decades. Long after I'm gone, it'll remind people of this story. I hope the lesson that endures is the right one. Respect property rights. Act with integrity, and when you make mistakes, own them and make things right. That's the best any of us can do.